This is a demonstration of product activation using the Orion network licensing platform from Agilis Software. For demonstration purposes, we're using this test application that's included in the Orion SDK that lets us adjust various parameters and see how the activation process works. Now, normally in production, when you're protecting your application, many of the parameters that are involved in an activation are hard-coded in your application or they're part of a data file. But with this test application, we can see them, we can change them, and become comfortable with the process. So you can see here that the URL for the license server is at agilissoftware.com. So we're using Agilis's Acropolis on-demand managed licensing service to host the license server. The name of the service is default. The product name is Orion Demo. The domain within that product is demonstration, and the username or the product serial number, the ID that we're using to identify this specific license, is Fred12. I'll come to those other parameters later on in this video. But for the moment, let's just go ahead and activate that license. Okay, so what happened there is this desktop application running on my machine communicated with the license server. It obtained the license, validated it, and has now activated this license and automatically locked it to this machine. I can do a check, which means I'm running a local check of the license against the encrypted local activation record, which is keeping track of this license. I can submit checking the license. Okay, the license is still valid, and I can then return the license or deactivate this application and return the license to the license server. Click return, operation succeeded. Okay, we will now walk through those steps in detail and also see what's happening in the license server as we do each of those steps in this process. We're now going to walk through using this demonstration step by step so you can see the interaction between the licensed application and the license server. So the very first step is we need to set up the license for that user, Fred12, in the license server. Now, as you can see here, I'm at the login page for the Acropolis license server that we're using. We said it will be the default service we're using, so I'll just log in there. And I'm going to go to the Orion Demo product. If you recall, as the product name we specified that we're using. And for the Orion Demo product, we're using the demonstration domain, one of possibly many domains for this product. Currently there are no users specified for this domain, and if you remember, the username that we want to use is Fred12. So I'll set that license up as a new user and call him Fred12. And optionally, I can specify a password as well for additional security, but I choose not to do that at this point. And I could also set up various license limits, a time limit, a quota limit, configure features and so on for this license. But let's keep it simple for the moment and just set up the license for user Fred12. So now we've set up the license, we're ready to do the activation. So here we are back at the test application running on my desktop. So I will click the activate button. There we go, the operation has succeeded. This application has now been activated. We'll now go to the license server and see the record of that in the license server. So here we are back in the license server, and here's that user, Fred12. Let's click on that user's name. Let's go to user status, and you can see here this license is now checked out. There's the date and time it was checked out. You can see the name of my machine, which is hubcap, the ID of the machine that the license was checked out on. And you can see the parameters. So 1 point was checked out, the session ID that was specified happened to be 22, there's been 1 use to date, and so forth. So the license server correctly activated the license and has tracked the current activated state of this license. What we'll now do is go back, deactivate that license, we'll return it to the license server, and we'll again see the change in the license server. So here we are back at the test application on my desktop. So I now want to return that license, or deactivate it and return the license to the server. So I click return, and the operation succeeded. We'll now go back to the license server and see that that has been correctly tracked in the license server. So here we are back at the license server looking at that demonstration domain, and there's our user, Fred12. So I'll click on Fred12 and click through to the user status, and you can see this license is no longer checked out. We can see the last machine on which it was checked out, and we can see when it was checked back in or returned to the license server. So what we've followed through there are the steps for a simple online activation where the license is set up in the license server, it's activated by the application, we confirm that in the license server, the application can then run standalone on that machine for a period and can then return the license or check it back into the license server, and you can see the license server tracking those activities. What we'll now do is look at some of those other parameters that you can play with on the demonstration application to test out other aspects and capabilities of Orion-based activation. Now that we've walked through the simplest possible application of a product activation with Orion, let's look at some of the other parameters that you can play with using this demonstration application. And I want to emphasize at this point that many of these parameters would never be seen by your user in a production environment. That things such as the license server URL, the service name, the product name would be hard-coded in your application. Other parameters would be specified at runtime by your application, or perhaps as part of a data file. So we spoke about the domain name. You need to specify which domain, and possibly many, for this product you'll be accessing for that license. And domains can be either named user domains in Orion, in which case there is a specific ID for each license in that domain. And Orion also supports the concept of anonymous user domains, and you can also use that with this test application. So if I set that the anonymous user is true, that means that I'll no longer need a username. There'll just be a pool of 5, 10, 50, and whatever it may be licenses, and any authorized user can activate a license out of that pool. Another thing I can test here is the ability with Orion to specify a product public key. So when you configure a product in Orion, you can set up an application password, and the Agilis tools will generate the corresponding public key. So you can require that that public key is supplied to do a successful activation or checkout from the license server. And what that gives you the ability to do is ensure that only you can issue licenses for your product. There's an additional level of security. As I mentioned when we did the simple demonstration, you can also specify a password as well as the username, so there's the ability to use that. Another very useful part of this tool is that you can simulate somebody trying to do an activation on a system which does not have a network connection. This is a facility supported by Orion, and we call it SneakerNet, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. But what I can do here is set the network connectivity, so rather than having to unplug my network, I can go ahead and have this demonstration application show what would happen in the case where somebody tries to activate a license on a machine that has no network connection. And I can also specify things such as you saw, the session ID, the number of points to be checked out, the checkout duration, and so on. But what we'll now do is set the maximum network connectivity to 1, so we're telling the demo to simulate, let's see what happens if there is no network connection when this user tries to activate their license. So we're now going to see what happens when we try to activate a license on a system that does not have a network connection. And we've set this demonstration application to simulate that. Now what this demonstration application is going to do is walk us through the detailed steps. Obviously in a production environment, what your user sees and what they're asked to do is entirely under your control, so it will not look like this. But let's go ahead and click on Activate. And the first screen that comes up gives us the ability to check that we have correctly specified the license server URL. So let's just test that to make sure we did get that correct. Alright, that's all good. So okay, we're good there. So we'll cancel out of that. Now, in trying to do the activation, the first step is the Orion client generates what we call this fingerprint file, a system fingerprint. And what we do is we save that file. We go ahead and do that. Okay, we saved that file. Now here are the instructions as to what to do. And again, these are the instructions that are set up in this demo. How you present this information to your user in a production environment is entirely up to you. So it tells us where the file is that we just created. It tells us to go to the license server and to go to the user self-service activation page and to upload that file. So we will now do that. So here we are, we're simulating the user who has tried to activate their license on a disconnected machine. The Orion client has generated that fingerprint file we saw, and the user has taken that fingerprint file, saved it perhaps onto a thumb drive, some other transportable medium, and they've hand carried it, sneakernet, over to another machine that does have a network connection to the license server, and they've gone to this screen, which is where they can obtain their license. So we've entered, as you can see here, the product name for which they need to activate the license, and we'll now just use the standard controls to browse to that file that has the fingerprint in it. So let me just do that. I happen to know where that is, and there it is. There's that fingerprint file, so I'll upload that and I'll generate the license. So what's happening now is the Orion server has accepted that fingerprint file, it's confirmed it's a valid request for a license, and it's generated the encrypted file that I need to take back over to my machine to activate that license. So I will just save that file, and I can now take that file back over to the licensed machine to activate that license. So here I am now, I'm back at the machine on which I wish to activate that license and on which I generated that system fingerprint. I uploaded the fingerprint to the license server on another machine. The license server validated it, returned that encrypted activation record file to me, and I've walked it back to this machine, and I'm now just going to browse to that file to activate this license. So let me do that, and there it is, there's that file I downloaded. So I load that up and I say OK. So operation succeeded. I just activated this license on a machine that does not have a network connection by hand carrying encrypted files over to a machine that does have a network connection, and then helping myself to the file I needed at the self-service web page for the Orion server. And there is an analogous process for returning a license, that if I try to deactivate this license or return it on a machine that doesn't have a network connection, in this case the Orion client will generate an encrypted deactivation certificate file that again I can hand carry, save onto a thumb drive, whatever it might be, walk over to another machine and upload that at the self-service web page for the Orion server. So activation of licenses can still happen on disconnected machines with all the facilities that are available on connected machines, and it's a user self-service operation, so there's no operational overhead for the software vendor. As well as supporting product activation on connected or disconnected systems managed by a hosted licensing server, the Orion Network Licensing Platform also supports floating licensing from a hosted server, or product activation or floating licensing managed by a license server installed on your end customer's network. For further information about Orion, or if you have questions, do please contact us at the addresses shown on the screen, and thank you for your time.